by the turnout. I talked with some people that I had invited on Facebook and otherwise, and I have to say, you guys are the diehards, like Assemblyman Patterson was saying. When I said, hey, do you want to come hear this great presentation about the pro-life movement and the age of Trump and everything else? Oh, yeah, that sounds great. It's really interesting. When is it? Well, it's 9 a.m. on Saturday. Oh. And there you go. So the fact that you guys are here is really encouraging. It shows me that it's great to have people that are really committed to this issue, that care a lot about it. And I'm going to go very briefly because John has a whole PowerPoint presentation on things that we're going to talk about, do the panel style. So I just want to give you a few key updates of things that I'm really encouraged about. John and I were both back in Washington, D.C. last week for the March for Life and for a conference called Evangelicals for Life, put on by Focus on the Family and Dr. Russell Moore, the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. It was a great event, and I really have a lot of hope. The thing that's, I don't know if the rest of you feel this way, but going into the election in November, especially the last weekend before the election, you know, the Saturday, Sunday, Monday before November 8th, I mean, I'll be honest, I was like almost physically sick. I was just really discouraged and very feeling almost depressed, thinking about the prospects of what things were going to look like for the next 4 or 8 years, and not just the next presidential term, but for the next 40 or 50 years. We really were, at that election, we were at kind of a tipping point. And all the crazy stuff that we've been seeing come out of California, I'm going to mention a couple of those bills and things, but all the crazy stuff that we saw coming out of California, when I would go back and meet with my fellow directors at different events, we're one of about 40 different state policy councils around the country. And I'd go talk to people that were in really good states like Arizona and Texas and Pennsylvania and Florida, you know, places where they've actually been able to pass some really solid pro-life legislation. And I was just looking at what we had been facing, like Assemblyman Patterson said, with the pregnancy care center bills and other things like that. And I said, if we have Justice Scalia replaced by a Hillary Clinton appointee, all of those policies that you see here in California are going to be enacted, I think, at the federal level, whether through executive orders or through judicial overreach or whatever it is, and it is going to be a very, very tough, bad situation for the pro-life movement. And now, I mean, obviously, we still have a lot of work to do. Like Assemblyman Patterson said, especially in California, we have a lot of work to do. But I feel like, ironically, you guys remember what President Obama's campaign slogan was? The posters with his face was the 4-letter word on the bottom of it. Starts with an H. Hope. The great irony is that after 4 or 8 years of President Obama and feeling like there really wasn't a lot of hope in the pro-life movement, I feel a huge amount of hope moving forward. Now, it doesn't mean, again, there was a complaint among some of us on the right when we talked about President Obama and the fact that his campaign slogan was hope and that was it. Do you guys remember people said hope is not a strategy? I think that's the thing that we have to be careful of, like Assemblyman Patterson said and like John said. We can feel hope, we can be hopeful, but that's not enough for us to just kind of sit back and go, oh, well, hey, look, we elected a president who promised he's going to appoint good judges, and we hopefully are going to get some good executive orders, and we hope that everything's going to work out. That is not a strategy, and that is not why I think all of you are here this morning. So I did want to really quick just hit a couple of quick things before John comes up here. Number one, just to give you a little bit more encouragement before I tell you some marching orders. Number one, the encouraging thing is even in the first 2 weeks, we've seen some massive successes for the pro-life movement just in the last 2 weeks. Number one, the biggest one is probably the appointment of Judge Gorsuch, or the nomination of Judge Gorsuch. As John mentioned, he's not directly ruled on an abortion case, There's not been a specific abortion case that has come before him. But if you look at his writings on assisted suicide, on euthanasia, on religious liberty, all these types of things, they indicate that he's going to be a very strong defender of the right to life. Secondly, the issue of the Mexico City policy that Megan explained, it does kind of ping-pong back and forth between presidential administrations. President Reagan enacted it, then President Clinton overturned it, then President Bush, George W. Bush reenacted it, then President Obama overturned it. So it does go back and forth. But this is why this is such a big deal. Have you guys ever heard the lie, frankly, from Planned Parenthood and other groups that say, well, no taxpayer money goes to fund abortions here in the United States. No taxpayer, we don't ever fund abortions. They try to basically paper it over and say, you shouldn't feel bad about funding Planned Parenthood and other groups because we don't spend taxpayer money on abortion. Well, the reality is we were going and taking that money, even though the Hyde Amendment prevented that money from being spent on domestic abortion, it was being spent on overseas abortion. It was being spent, like she said, on Planned Parenthood International, on Marie Stopes, on all these other groups that were going to the developing world, to Africa, to Asia, to the Middle East, and they were basically funding abortion and committing abortion, promoting abortion with tax dollars. So imagine, if you will, that China or Russia or India was directly funding Planned Parenthood here in the United States. And they were paying for the promotion of abortion in minority communities. And they were pushing abortion through healthcare policy. I don't know about you, but I'd be really offended if you had a foreign government or multiple foreign governments that were paying so that our citizens would kill their own children. That's exactly what we had been doing for the last 8 years. And again, it's not something that the pro-abortion forces wanted to talk about because it was all kind of masked under the idea of, no, this is health care for the developing world. You know, we really care about people in sub-Saharan Africa, and we just want to provide them with, medically necessary health care services. Well, very frequently, our tax dollars through government policy were directly tied. If you want to have these good health care services, then you also have to take abortion as part of that package. You have to have abortion coverage and abortion promotion within your society. So the fact that as one of his very first actions, President Trump overturned that is huge. I did also want to just say one thing funny before I give you a couple of quick legislative updates on Planned Parenthood. You can tell that Planned Parenthood knows that they're in trouble. If you go online and you read the Twitter accounts, the Facebook posts and everything of both their official accounts, but also if you read from Cecile Richards, who's the president of Planned Parenthood. I want to read you a series of tweets very quickly. So January 31st, the day that Neil Gorsuch was nominated by President Trump, these all came from Cecile Richards. Neil Gorsuch has an alarming history of interfering with reproductive rights and reproductive health. Roe v. Wade has been settled law for 40-plus years, and support for access to safe legal abortion has never been higher. If you oppose Roe v. Wade and access to basic health care, you are not qualified to sit on the Supreme Court of the United States. So they're very nervous, they're very scared, but here's the best part. That's what they have to say when they're out there aggressively trying to, rile up their base, and so they can go and get donations. But the problem is that type of aggressive pro-abortion rhetoric does not play well with the general public. So that was on the 31st. That was on Tuesday. Earlier this morning, yesterday and then this morning, she's striking a very different tone. Same woman, Cecile Richards, but now she's on MSNBC, and she's trying to present this very warm and fuzzy quote. 1 in 5 women in America has been to Planned Parenthood. They don't come to make a political statement. They come for health care. So the same organization, the same people that are aggressively making a political statement against Judge Gorsuch and against the pro-life movement, well, how dare you accuse it? We're just about health care. How could you oppose that? So the Planned Parenthood and the radical pro-abortion movement, I think, knows that their time on the federal dole is coming to an end. And I think that's a huge, huge victory. So that's the good news. Now I want to tell you one piece of legislation that John mentioned. I'm not going to rehash all the things that Assemblyman Patterson said. He actually gave you some really good background. But there is one bit of legislation here in California that I think we need to be very aware of, and then I'm going to give you kind of some marching orders, and then I'm going to have John come up. Okay. So the new bill is called SB 18. The reason this bill, I think, is so troublesome is it's not specifically directly a pro-life or pro-choice bill. It's a little bit more broad, and this has to do with parental rights and protection of children more broadly. And this is called the Children's Bill of Rights, basically, in the state of California. So this is what it is. It's fairly simple, but the problem with this bill is not so much what it says, but it's what it asserts. There's some bills, for example, that very specifically lay out this is a specific set of policy procedures and proposals. This bill, to be honest, it's almost as sweeping as making they call it the Bill of Rights because it's almost that sweeping in declaring this is the new worldview, this is the new position that we're going to take to all children in California. And it says, the legislature finds and declares that all children and youth, regardless of gender, class, race, ethnicity, national origin, culture, religion, immigration status, sexual orientation, or ability, have inherent rights that entitle them to protection, special care, and assistance, including but not limited to the following. If you read that, they basically, it's very similar to like the preamble to the Constitution or to the Declaration of Independence. It's very much saying, look, this is what we believe. As the legislature, this is what we believe, and here's how we're going to enact these beliefs. But here's the problem. These are the rights that they say children have, children under the age of 18. The right to parents, guardians, or caregivers who act in their best interest. The right to form healthy attachments with adults responsible for their care and well-being. The right to live in a safe and healthy environment. The right to social and emotional well-being. The right to opportunities to attain optimal cognitive, physical, and social development. The right to appropriate quality education and life skills leading to self-sufficiency in adulthood. And the right to appropriate quality health care. Now, let me just say, if this was a nonprofit organization that was working with kids and that was their Bill of Rights, okay, that sounds fine. You know what? I think we all should care about all of these things for children. But when this is the government that is saying this, and they're not giving these rights through parents, but they are saying that children have these rights independent of their parents, that begins to be very problematic. Because what happens if you as a parent are found to be in violation of this Children's Bill of Rights? Well, it says the child, your 12-year-old, has a right to parents, guardians, and caregivers who act in their best interest. Well, who decides what that best interest is? It's not the parents. What if, for example, a school counselor, an agent of the state at a public high school, decides that your 12-year-old daughter has been talking with them and says, you know what, I just feel like I'm conflicted. I feel like I'm actually a boy trapped inside a girl's body. And the school counselor says, you know what, I think that the parents of this child are not going to understand. So it's in the best interest of the child to remove this child and place them in a foster home or as a ward of the state. Or they say, well, it's their right to live in a safe and healthy environment. How many of you guys, I won't ask for a show of hands, how many of you guys have ever had children growing up, or you were a child growing up, and you didn't want to go to church on Sunday morning? Has that ever happened to you ever? Well, what happens if they decide that social and emotional well-being, you mention that to your school counselor, and they say, oh, wow, this is religious abuse, that these children are being dragged away to Mass on Sunday mornings without any choice in the matter. I could go through, you can see a whole litany of different types of things, but this is the type of legislation, like Assemblyman Patterson said, that is just coming out of Sacramento. And here's where I think the marching orders come in. This is where we're going to need all of you to really step up your efforts, not just on this Saturday morning, but moving forward. I want to give you a background story. When Assemblyman Patterson mentioned the bill that dealt with pregnancy care centers, I was there in Sacramento when that bill was voted on, and Assemblyman Patterson spoke out very eloquently in opposition to that bill. And when we were in the hearings for that bill, AB 775, there were probably 120, 130 individuals, mostly women. I think of the 130 people there was maybe 120 women and children and maybe 10 men. And they were from pregnancy care centers all across the state. They had moms with babies and saying, my baby is here today because of this pregnancy care center. My child would not be here today if it was not for these people. And yet, every single Democrat voted in favor of that bill to attack pregnancy care centers and demand that they refer for abortions. Every single Republican voted against it, and every single Democrat voted for it. Now, here's the problem, and this is where you guys come in. On one of the other bills, SB 1146, we found out, talking to one of the presidents of Biola University, he had mentioned they had someone from that had authored that bill come in. He was talking with him, and it came out over the course of discussing things with him that he had never once heard, before the bill was on the floor, he had never heard anything from any of the people that were going to be affected by the bill. A lot of times I think what happens is, whether it's pregnancy care centers, whether it's Christian schools, whether it's pro-life organizations, whatever, we all have stuff to do, right? We all have families, we all have kids, we have jobs. A lot of times we are not thinking about what's going on in Sacramento. But if we are not proactive, things are going to change very rapidly, and by the time we get up to speed sometimes, it's almost too late. So what we need to do is we need to not expect that if we just kind of keep our head down, hide behind the podium, if we keep our head down and try to avoid being seen by people in Sacramento, just because you can't see them or you don't see them doesn't mean that they're going to leave you alone. So what we are going to have to do over the next 2 years before the next California election, and, well, frankly, folks, let me back up. We need to stop thinking of this as a 2-year or a 4-year cycle. This needs to be like an ongoing, long-term thing. We need to start getting into the habit of engaging with our legislators on a regular, consistent basis so that they know us well enough that before they even think about introducing legislation in the future, they think, how is it going to affect those people that are coming into my office regularly? So we'll have a lot more to talk with you about that, but I want to go ahead and bring John up because I don't want to go too long. I want to make sure I don't steal his time, but I want to again thank John and thank you guys for being here. And you can find out more about us and what we're doing at our website, californiafamily.org. I do see 2 quick hands, so go ahead. Sure. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. So the question, for those of you who are watching on Facebook Live, listening online, the main question are different groups, and I would say right-to-life groups and other socially conservative groups, like Right to Life Central California, California Family Council, et cetera. Are we concerned about the size and the scope of government as well? And I would say absolutely, yes. And this is actually a unique opportunity that I think we have now under President Trump. How many of you guys are on Facebook or Twitter or any sort of social media or anything? How many of you guys have been very surprised to see some of your left-leaning friends suddenly care about presidential overreach?
It's been about 8 years since any of them cared about it.
Yeah. SB 18 was authored by Senator Richard Pan from the Sacramento area. The vaccination bill. Yeah, he had also authored a bill, SB 277, that dealt with mandatory vaccinations. On that note, I think that we have a unique opportunity under President Trump to actually come alongside some of our left-leaning friends and say, you know what? Yeah, it does kind of stink when you're not in power, doesn't it? It is kind of awful when there is a large, overpowering federal bureaucracy that you feel like you don't have any control. Maybe we should do something about that. Maybe we should try to constrain and restrict the power and the reach and the scope of government. And I don't know exactly what that's going to mean moving forward, but I do think that's definitely an opportunity and something we should try to do.
And we're about to talk about a little bit of how that's going to happen as it relates to abortion on the federal level, looking at the different agencies and how they regulate things. So that'll be coming up next.
And so with that, unless there's any other questions real quick, I want to make sure we get to that panel, but I will then end and then we will transition.
And we can ask questions during the panel period. So everyone, round of applause for Jonathan.